we want to record these presentations. I'm going to stop the recording just before we go to the finances and budget. But just so you know, you're on a call right now that is being recorded in case others who are not able to be with us today want to join in. So I don't want to prohibit any questions or comments from coming, but I just wanted to make you aware that we are now recording. Okay, sorry, Brian.
For the record, I'll say that again, that I'm just grateful to the vestry and to Kent, and that we're a parish that can continue to have its music program really, at a high level, which not all churches have been able to do during this pandemic. Obviously, it's not been easy. I think that the pandemic has hit musicians particularly hard, and because we are not able to do our work online very easily. People who speak, that works okay over Zoom and over other platforms, but singing does not work well because of the latency, the different internet speeds. So if we try to sing together over Zoom, it sounds very bad, very out of sync. So we have to do all of these complicated things to make it work. So what I've been doing is I go to the church and I record. So let's say a choir piece, I'll record the accompaniment, the organ part for the choir piece. And then on Zoom, we have choir rehearsals, but all of the participants have to be muted. So they're singing at home and I'm playing or singing along their part, but I don't hear what they're doing, which is totally contrary to my usual training, where you're supposed to be listening for all the mistakes and listening for ways that you can improve the singing and all this thing. I don't know what they're doing. I have to just sort of trust them, right? And so understandably, not all of our choir has been participating throughout. So some people have said they want to take a little break till we're back together. Some people come occasionally, but not every week. But we are really super lucky to have 4 section leaders who are very dependable and great musicians. And so they're able to do that with a handful of very dedicated volunteers that come every week too. So anyway, we rehearse, then I'll send them my recording and I ask them to record their part on their phone while they're listening to my recording with earphones. And they email all those recordings to me, and then I put them together in a program called GarageBand. I mix the audio and I line everything up, and then I try to make it sound balanced. And then I put that into something called iMovie, where I put a picture up and I put the titles in and I do things like that. So just to get a hymn or an anthem that maybe, they might already know the piece, right? And it might not need a whole lot of rehearsal per se, but it still takes hours of technology time to produce. So in case you're wondering why, we only do 1 hymn a week or whatever, that's part of the reason. So
that's amazing.
And I'll say, when I and also the choir people, when we're making recordings, we're being critical, right? So I might have to make 4 recordings of the same piece until I get one that I think is good. So anyway, that's just a little insight into what I'm doing, but I'm grateful to those of the choir that have stayed with me in this process. And the plus side is, some people are hearing the music, like my mom, who normally wouldn't, depending, where they're living and everything. And it's also given me a appreciation for some new skills, and also the hymns. So if you can read what I wrote in the annual report. I'm going to stop talking since we're under time.
Thank you.
And
Thank
God
you, Brian.
bless you, Brian,
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank
for your
you.
dedication and hard work.
Thank you.
So,
That's awesome.
very much appreciated. And now I'm going to introduce Jack Gallup and John Lewis, who are the staff that help bring all that music into our home. So turn it away or take it away, Jack and John.
All right, thank you. So I'm John Lewis. I am the fruity term would be the technical director. Essentially, what that means is for all the live streams of the worship services, I get to choose what gets shown when, what lights get turned on, what camera angles are shown, when to switch camera angles, when the videos are played, all that sort of stuff. And also I edit the videos for her sermons and her videos for work. And I'm just so grateful to have something that I'm passionate about to give back to the church. I did choir, I did things like that, but really this makes this service not even feel like the hour that it is, because I just enjoy it so much. And really, that's about all I have to say. Yeah.
I mean,
go
I
ahead,
feel the
Jack.
same way, where this is something I had been wanting to give back to the church for a while, but I wasn't really interested in anything they had to offer. So when this popped up, I'm like, okay, I'll try it, but it makes the service more fun for someone who would normally just sit in the pew and do nothing. But so I tried choir. I didn't like it that much, but this gave me the joy of coming to church.
Thank you very much,
Oh,
Jack. And
awesome, guys. Thank you.
Thank you both. You do a wonderful job of it, both.
And back to the Lewis household again, turning it over to Karen for the Deacons report.
Hello, everyone. It is so nice to see all your faces. If you can believe it, I am approaching my 3rd anniversary of being your deacon and being ordained, which has been a lifelong calling and dream of mine fulfilled. And I'm so grateful to be able to perform my diaconal duties at St. Luke's, because you're all such a loving and welcoming, and you put up with me quite well. So I'm happy to be here. 2020 started a little bit of a turbulent year for me. I actually was very ill in the beginning of the year. I don't know if you guys remember that. I wonder if it was Corona that I had. I was doing my diaconal duties as usual, preaching once every other month. I was able to participate in the MOPS. I did my Ashes to Go like I have been doing for several years. I had counted 70 people that I imposed ashes on and prayed over. But once the pandemic hit, my presence at the church really did stop. And my duties changed and morphed into how I can support the parish and particularly Kent going forward. I ramped up my preaching. I think it was probably averaging once a month. I was helping out with evening compline, continued making phone calls, not able to visit in person, but able to make phone calls and keep connected to people. But I really do just truly miss my spot on the altar next to Kent. So one of the new developments is that I'm going to be taking over leadership of the MOPS. And I can't stress how important I feel that ministry is. I feel, if we didn't have a MOPS group visiting the sick or the shut-in, I really don't know the purpose of the church without that. I can't imagine not having that ministry, but I do feel we are in desperate need to grow. And I would like to see more people volunteering to, it's not a huge commitment, but if you could choose one person, because I think our needs are going to grow in that area, and the groups making the visits really do have to grow. And so one of the things I feel could be helpful to the group is, I am a trained chaplain, and I'm working on almost a curriculum for if we were to meet, let's say monthly, to have an educational piece as part of that meeting. Is it be working on active listening skills, responding appropriately, maybe, privacy issues, educational pieces to make us all better at what we do, because it is an art and a craft of visiting the sick and extending the love that we have in the parish towards the people that have come before us, that really helped build our parish. I can't imagine not doing that. And, you know, one quick thing, my daughter has always had this dream of somehow making food, like maybe inviting a bunch of young adults a couple times a year and making frozen dinners, like small dinners. And maybe she may, you know, do that. We could freeze them and then the mops could perhaps take them out. So that's one of the things that she's been talking about that for 10 years. So that could be something that maybe we encourage to happen. As far as my employment outside of the church, I began 2020 in a new role. I am the palliative care chaplain for Chilton Medical Center, which is located in Pompton Plains. It's about 40 miles north of where I live. You know, I'd been a hospice chaplain for 8 years and loved it so much and couldn't even imagine leaving that ministry. There were a few things that happened. My beloved Visiting Nurse Association of Somerset Hills was taken over, also by Atlantic Health, but it just didn't have the same feel. And I did have these stirrings that it could be time to leave. And I felt God truly call me to Chilton in a kind of a direct and assertive way, because I really didn't want to leave hospice. And I went almost kicking and screaming to the hospital, but it's also always been a dream to do hospital work, but to still be somehow a part of people that are coming to the end of life or diagnosed with life-limiting diseases, to be able to minister to them. So I'm continuing to do that. I started my role in January 13th, was my first day there. The same day Joint Commission came to survey the hospital. So my manager was busy for the first couple of weeks of my employment there. I wasn't oriented. I didn't have a computer. I didn't even have a chair. I had nowhere to put my coat. He was fired only 2 weeks after I began. And we were then hit with a pandemic. And I was truly, it was as if I didn't have a badge. I had security tell me to leave because I couldn't prove my employment. I mean, that's how unprepared I was to be there. But I somehow, I'm a self-starter. I've always been pretty independent, and I was able to carve out a way. It took a lot more effort than I think I should have had to extend, but I did it. And we were hit with the pandemic. And then there was like a lot of questions about if it was even worth using PPE to have a spiritual care visit for some of these patients. So it was just a lot of unknown in the beginning. And the way I offer spiritual care drastically changed in March. Chaplains call themselves the ministry of presence. We are spiritual presence. And how do you be a spiritual presence when you can't be in the presence of the family? And there were some even saying it wasn't safe for me to be in the presence of the patient who was at the end of life. But I found a way. I did make the decision early on that it was worth the risk for me as a young, healthy person to go into the rooms. And I was really a bridge for the families to be able to say goodbye to their loved ones before they died. And without my, the floor nurses were doing that a lot too. But I had the luxury of time in my profession to be the one that allows that to happen. So we were using FaceTime and just odd technology that I've never used in spiritual care to incorporate a way for people to have end-of-life prayers, end-of-life sacraments, and say goodbye and have, because it's just unnatural not to be with your loved one when they're dying. It also is important that you have those contacts with your loved one when they're dying for bereavement after the death. And right now I am dealing with a lot of bereavement issues because I had a lot of death And so I continue the relationship with the families for a year after they die to offer support. So I continue that. But one of the other big moments for me this year was that I did finally become an official board certified chaplain. It's easier. I mean, I don't think people quite realize the amount of work that went into that. It took me about 25 years of my life to finally achieve that. And to do that in the midst of all of this other change did feel monumental to me. Going forward this year, I'm working on ways of providing spiritual care to the staff, many of whom are suffering with moral distress or just great fatigue or just anguish overall on what, we're almost comparing it to having lived through a wartime. Just the change was dramatic for a lot of the staff. So I'm working on ways to do that. One of the things that I have been doing and started about 8 months ago was that I joined this wellness group with Atlantic Health. And their focus was always on spirit, on care to mind and body. And it is now mind, spirit, and body. So I'm making weekly reflections that are posted on a social media platform called Workplace. And they're getting about 100 views. And I think there are not a lot, but about 20 people that find them meaningful. And if anyone wants to see these videos, I do have my own YouTube page that John Lewis has set up for me where they're all public. You could Google Karen Burke Lewis, and they're geared for hospital staff, but they're interfaith, but they really are a way of developing your relationship with God for spiritual peace in your life. The last thing I did at the hospital was,
Thank you,
oh,
Karen.
I'm out of time. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so
I
sorry,
understand.
Karen. You are a blessing to us. And I know that it has been a very full year for you. Thank you so much. I do want to turn it over to Dr. Pete now, who has been advising on protocols for COVID.
How you doing? How's everybody today? Hopefully all of you are well. First I just want to say thank you to Reverend Kent for asking me to speak to everybody today. Obviously 2020 has been a very difficult and challenging year at so many levels, whether it be family life, work life, relationships, social activities, and certainly spiritual life. So, when I was initially asked to talk, I was trying to figure out what can I possibly discuss about COVID-19 and protocols and safety and prevention, with all the news and all these inundated recommendations that come out that are constantly changing. It gets very confusing. So I kind of decided to discuss some real basic things about COVID-19 and how it's transmitted, and how we kind of incorporated those thoughts into creating the protocols that St. Luke's has set forth at this point in order to protect our clergy, the congregation, our parish family, and any visitors to the parish. So as you know, the diocese essentially suspended live worship back in March of 2020. And I know it was a very trying time, not only for myself, friends, family, just trying to figure out how do we connect spiritually if you don't really have any access, to going to church. So it was a wonderful thing that we were able to do things virtually. So I think that became very, very important. And I'm happy to see that it's been such a success since its onset back in March. So we had that started in March, and then in late May, June, Reverend Kent reached out about a reopening committee for COVID, and how we can kind of pull everybody back in and maybe get things running again. So that was created in June, and during that time we received a bunch of recommendations and guidelines set forth by the diocese, and the reopening committee had to kind of put together a way of making a system that works for our particular parish. So we got together several nights, we got divided up into subcommittees, and really kind of hashed things out, had some really good conversations and thoughts, and created the policies and protocols that we currently have and been utilizing since that time to allow in-person worship, continuing with the virtual worships, And I think it's worked really, really well. And we were finally able to reopen for live worship at some point in August of 2020. I think it was early to mid August 2020, if my memory serves me correctly there. And, with all of the guidelines and everything that was set forth, I'm really, really happy to say that as of today, to the best of my knowledge, there have been absolutely 0 cases of COVID that has resulted, that came as a result of gathering, at live worship or any of the events, the fair, and so forth. And I think that's something to really, really, really be proud of. That says something about our parish and the way that we were able to follow the guidelines and recommendations to, prevent disease and illness. So, I mean, that's a great thing. So just a little bit about, COVID and how it spreads. Coronavirus essentially has the name coronavirus, referring to its ring of spikes that are attached on the virus. Now, those spikes typically are utilized to bind to receptors on your cells. And I'm trying not to get too scientific, but just basics. But it binds to the receptors on the cells. The virus then gains access to the cells where it would reproduce and produce more virus. And then hence we have a full-blown infection. So, why is this important? Well, it's important because we need to think about how this thing spreads. And, typically the primary source of spread is through person-to-person contact, especially those that are close to each other. When I say close to each other, we're talking about 6 feet proximity. So this is where we get our 6-foot social distancing guidelines and recommendations. So obviously we're utilizing that as one of the guidelines in the church. As far as spread, you can get it from asymptomatic individuals. You can get it from symptomatic individuals, those with very mild symptoms. And that's where the masks come into play. So, by wearing masks, you're able to reduce the amount of droplets that are expelled. And those droplets are typically expelled through talking, singing, sneezing, coughing, all of these different things. So by wearing the masks, you can minimize the amount of droplets that get spread. Therefore, less people come in contact with the droplets. People don't inhale the droplets. People don't touch the droplets and then touch one of the mucous membranes, which could be mouth, nose, eyes, or whatnot, and thus prevent infection. Now, there's always concern about, transmission through contact surfaces. Contact surface transmission is not considered to be the most common type of spread. But certainly if somebody is coughing or sneezing and you get droplets on a surface, somebody in the nearby vicinity touches that particular surface, then touches an area of mucous membranes, again, eyes, nose, mouth. You could potentially get virus that way, but it's not believed to be the most common type of spread. So that's where the disinfecting component or policy comes into play, with the hand sanitizing, the face shields, using tongs, those types of things. As far as additional transmission, obviously they talk about in the guidelines now about if you're going to have a gathering, indoors. I think it was recently changed to 35% capacity, but it's still recommended for 10 people in an individual setting indoors, according to the state guidelines. You still need to have a well-ventilated area, and that would be the reason that we have the windows open in the church whenever there's any type of group gatherings. As far as the singing goes, it was advised by the diocese to have 20-foot distancing. So, again, that's why the singing is somewhat limited, and Brian has to kind of set up everything the way he's been doing it. Hopefully in the near future, we'll get things back to more of a normal situation. So with all of that being said, what does that really mean for St. Luke's worship, et cetera, going forward? I think we need to continue doing exactly what we're doing, because again, I said there's been no cases known due to the way that we've been doing things so far. So I would encourage us to continue to do exactly what we've been doing. I will continue to be in regular contact with Reverend Kent, as this is a very fluid type of situation. It's constantly changing, and I will do my due diligence in making sure that we kind of stay up with the CDC and the New Jersey Department of Health guidelines. I'm going to recommend getting vaccinated. I think that becomes important. That's the way we're going to end this pandemic. There's many places that are going to be having it available, more opening up on a regular basis. But lastly, I do want to say that pandemics lead to a lot of stress. It leads to anxiety depression. We don't have that type of contact that we had before with people. So I want to emphasize to be there for each other. Recognize some things that maybe you're seeing in other people emotionally that you have contact with. Reach out to them. Be supportive. If you're feeling that way, reach out to somebody else. Get the help that you need. Everybody's experiencing this in some way, shape, or form, and we all need to be there together for one another, and really to get each other through this. We're not alone in this. You always have somebody there, so reach out. And if there's any questions, I'll take those later, obviously.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Dr. Pete. Really appreciate the update and your work throughout this year, keeping us safe. Kent, it is over to you for the state of the parish.
Okay, if you heard my sermon, you heard a little bit about this. You'll hear a little more detail now, but I wanted to start by saying a number of years ago, had the privilege of going to California and visiting the giant sequoia and redwood trees. They're huge trees. One of them is tunneled out. You can actually drive a car under it. If you stand at the base of those trees and you look up, you feel so small. And I had an experience this week of realizing how I had lost the forest for the trees. I wonder if others of you have. I found the challenges of 2020 to have been enormous, like those trees in California. This year has been a year where I felt stretched and drained and wearied like never before. One Sunday we were worshiping as normal. Alpha was taking place, and within a week it had all stopped. And everything we do had to be recreated, reimagined. Many are struggling now, even still, with being stuck at home, feeling restricted and cut off from normal face-to-face interactions. And at church, many of us miss gathering together. As a nation, we've witnessed nerves frayed, divisions exposed, and sides pulling further apart, with increasing divisions of politics and race. I sat down last week to prepare my annual report, and I didn't think I'd have much to write. But an amazing thing happened to me, and this isn't my whole report, so I do encourage you to read that. But I realized that I'd been looking at the trees. I'd been looking at these big challenges, and I'd lost sight of the forest. And the forest that I had lost sight of was the gracious hand of God doing so much in and through the people of this parish. I stand in awe of God at work in our midst. And I marvel at all of you, the people of this parish, who once again have risen to the challenge, this time to an unprecedented challenge. And I realized how much we have to be thankful for in 2020. We have increased participation in prayer. We added 2 daily prayer groups, a Zoom leadership meeting and an Alpha texting prayer group. In addition, we have small groups that were added, a mom's group that meets regularly, the Thursday night conference call Compline. Last spring, I was blessed to lead 35 people in a community Bible study that's been going on in our community for years. We also added in the spring a Narnia night reading group for families. In addition, our existing small groups adapted and managed to continue online. The Monday night small group, men's Bible study, the Monday 12:15. The choir, as you heard, took rehearsals over Zoom. Alpha finished online the last 3 sessions, and now that paved the way for doing Alpha online as we're doing currently. Our youth group gathered online on Fridays. Our confirmation classes continued over Zoom. Not only that, our worship services have broadened our reach. We're now live streaming to friends and family of parishioners all over the country. Our worship has adapted, and we continue to do liturgy, music, regular Eucharist, and sermons each week. We've discovered new ways to do old things, such as the Nourish New Jersey Hunger Walk and the fair. And we were blessed to have what many described as a Hallmark Christmas movie moment when we stood out on Main Street and sang Silent Night on Christmas Eve. We formed 2 significant new partnerships in 2020, one with our sister church, St. Mark's in Basking Ridge, to do Alpha together. Last February, before the pandemic, we did the retreat together, and now we're doing Alpha online together. And then in the wake of the racial tensions, especially after the heartbreaking death of George Floyd, our second partnership began this year with Pastor Harvey Carey and the people of his multi-ethnic inner city church in Detroit, Citadel of Faith. The monthly calls with those folks are enriching understanding. They're fostering unity in Christ and building lasting relationships. And we've maintained our stewardship level, holding the budget steady, with many increasing their pledge and several new pledges this year, despite the economic upheaval. We have not had to use the Bridge to the Future last year or in 2019. That was a fund that we created during the Vision Legacy campaign, and the vestry has managed that carefully and sustained it through the years. Now, I don't mean in saying all this to ignore the difficulties. It's been a hard year. The loss and the grief is real, felt by many of you in this parish who've lost loved ones to the coronavirus, who've struggled financially. And many of us grieve the loss of our old way of life, and especially being able to gather for fellowship. I think children especially have lost much in what they missed out in school and missing in church. The losses are real. The challenges are great, and our country isn't through this yet. We're sailing through the storm of a pandemic, economic decline, and political and racial turmoil, the likes of which we have not seen in this country in years, perhaps ever. A couple of weeks ago on the Alpha National Conference call, a leader described the church as in crisis. The Christian research group Barna reports that since the pandemic began, viewers and members connected to churches have declined 25%. And millennial engagement with church is down 50%. We at St. Luke's have experienced some loss in viewership, but I do not believe that we are a church in crisis. God has us right where he wants us to be. Yes, the challenges are real. The challenges are great, but our God is greater. I believe that you could describe St. Luke's as pandemic strong. We have emerged from 2020 to embark on the ministry ahead of us in 2021 strong. It is miraculous to me to see the hand of God at work, bringing good from the bad of the pandemic. Just that one small example, what I call the minor Christmas miracle. That forecast on Christmas Eve, do you know this was like 90 to 100% chance of rain at 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. I got a call that Christmas Eve morning from a PPAC Gladstone police officer, and he said to me, "Do you still want to close down Main Street?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Have you looked at the forecast?" And my response was, "We are praying." And at 5 p.m., it was raining all up and down the East Coast and in most of New Jersey, but it was not raining here in PPAC Gladstone. Thanks be to God for that, and in so many other ways. God has sustained us in this past year. So yes, we've been sailing through the storm of times in which we live, and on many levels, it's like a Cat 5 hurricane. But through it, Jesus has called us to get out of the boat. And I would say, from my perspective, time and again, I have seen you, the people of St. Luke's, do just that, and in faith, step out of the boat. Yet we must not merely look backward, we also have to look forward. We've come through this pandemic in better shape than many, many churches. We're not untouched by the losses, but we are nevertheless strong. And those to whom much is given, much is required. With the great challenges presented by this pandemic come great opportunities. People need now more than ever to know the love of Christ, the blessings of fellowship with people of faith, the joy and spiritual growth, and the heart of God reaching out to those in need. And oh, how this world needs to know the blessings that are found in unity, Christian unity in the body of Christ. We at St. Luke's have much to give. We have much to share. Yes, we have been blessed by God and we have sailed straight through a Cat 5 pandemic, but we must not merely focus on ourselves and celebrating how God has strengthened us in 2020. We must also look to his calling to reach out and share his love. This is no time for St. Luke's to retreat. This is no time to merely circle the wagons. Yes, there will be rebuilding work to do, but I believe we're entering a season of unprecedented opportunity. when God is calling us not to retreat, but move forward. And I believe he's calling us to be strong for others in need, to provide leadership support in the body of Christ, to share the good news of God's love in this broken world. And I believe especially he's calling us to experience and to share his healing. I firmly believe the Holy Spirit heals today, and many in our world need God's healing from loss, from grief, from brokenness in these tumultuous times, and many need to be healed and set free from sin sickness that unravels lives and keeps people from knowing God's love. Let us look to God, who has made us St. Luke's pandemic strong, as we seek in 2021 to honor God's presence, celebrate Christ's love, serve God's people, and know the Holy Spirit's healing in 2021. To him be the honor and glory and power and praise forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Kent. Now I'd like to ask Dave Ingrey to give us an update on stewardship.
Thank you, Melissa. So on behalf of the 2021 Stewardship Committee, I just want to begin by thanking God for the response that this parish has given to the challenge of keeping the church going through this pandemic. As usual, by the time of the annual meeting, we still have about 16 who have not pledged that we expect to pledge. So some of these numbers are hopefully not quite finalized yet. But assuming we get our last 16 pledges in, or most of them, we will set a high for dollars pledged since 2008. We will have the most families pledging since at any time since 2013. And we have already set a high for the average pledge amount. Cumulatively, the average pledge is up about 36% since 2019, the average individual family pledge. Now, the number of pledging families should end up about flat over the last 4 or 5 years, but it is up slightly, given that we normally lose a number of families to various factors. So this is good that we're maintaining. And we are amazed and overjoyed that so few families had to decrease their pledge this year. There were only 6 so far that decreased their pledge over last year. This is truly miraculous. However, the number of new pledges is way down, as you might expect. I think we can safely attribute that to coronavirus. Nevertheless, the question persists, how do we bring in more people? So looking forward to 2021, as has been, as we all hope for, we can now safely go back to church. And as more and more people get the vaccine, we'll be able to do that more and more safely. I think one of the lessons that I've learned this past year is how much I need to worship in a community of faith and not just online. Kent and the other leaders of St. Luke's are continually working on services, functions, and growing opportunities for all of us. Reaching out. We'll be reaching out, as Kent mentioned, we're doing the Alpha with St. Mark's. We've got the Citadel of Faith with Harvey and his church, and hopefully much more that we'll be able to give back to the other churches in our diocese. And one of our priorities you'll hear about in the budget was to hire a youth minister for this year. I think that's been a huge item that's been missing over the last number of years since Norm stepped down, essentially. And continuing our online services will continue to enable people to stay connected to St. Luke's wherever they are on vacation or if they have to move. So that's it in a nutshell. I just want to end by thanking Melissa, Ann, and Barbara. We turned the St. Luke's into essentially a small group of prayer and helping one another grow in faith that has been extremely edifying for me. I think the 4 of us worked very well together as a team, each taking part of the load. And I thank all of you for your faithful response to the church this year. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And yes, thank you for all your hard work on stewardship. So turning it over now to John for finances and budget discussion.